Let's get started. Welcome everyone again. As you likely all know, RapidAuthor for Teamcenter 2512 has been released, and today it's time again for our new webinar. As usual, in today's session, we will give you an overview of the new functionality introduced with this latest version of RapidAuthor for Teamcenter. And if you have any questions, we will leave some time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. And if there's any further information you need or you'd like to discuss a deeper look into specific functionality, you can always contact us afterwards. First, in this session, we will look at features related to preparing your data and tools. Then we move on to authoring itself, split into features for S1000D, for DITA, and for general authoring. And at the end of this part, we will also have a look at a couple of new 2D related features and publication improvements. And after authoring, we will spend some time presenting new functionality of our Teamcenter integration. We'll start with preparation, specifically with data import. With RapidAuthor 2512, authors can easily remove small holes during import. This improves import time and project performance if small holes are not relevant to your current authoring task. The holes simplification option allows you to specify the size of holes to be ignored and their type. You can define whether both through and blind holes will be removed, or you can just remove through holes. Another configurable import setting related to holes is their geometric quality. You can now set a minimum number of corners for holes to ensure the desired quality. In our example, we will set the quantity of corners equal to 8, and you can hopefully in this recording see the difference between before and after. We'll notice a slight difference at least. This can become quite useful if you want to reduce the overall size of the imported model, as holes are notoriously picky when you don't give them enough polygons. To be entirely correct, it's obviously not the holes with the polygons, but the surrounding of the holes, right? Now you can keep the quality of the holes on an acceptable level while reducing the size of other components. Another improvement is related to the import of procedures from EasyPlan and Service Planner, and it's based on a customer request. Empty steps containing neither geometry nor substeps can now be imported or skipped depending on the import settings. Previously, all empty steps were ignored, which resulted in an incomplete step structure of the imported procedure. Now, as most of you will know, RapidAuthor works with meters. Previously, the user had to check the unit of measurement used in the original CAD data, and then specify the multiplier to use to convert millimeters, inches, or other measurement units to meters. The importer can now automatically detect and apply the unit of measurements defined in the source CAD data files. This feature was previously already added to RapidJT components, and now it's also available in Rapid Data Converter if this is what you're using. This automatic detection is supported for several formats listed on this slide. If your format is not in the list or your CAD data does not contain information about units of measurement, you will see the word unknown in brackets here instead of the detected measurement unit. That's underlined at the top, if that's hard to read. In this case, you will need to disable automatic detection, and you can still select the appropriate measurement unit with the radio buttons, just like before. In our sample, it is millimeters, and you can check the results of the size conversion in the sizes section. And as in most releases, we have reviewed and updated the CAD files supported on import. As you can see, we have added support for additional cut data file formats with Rapid Data Converter in this release. And for a full list of currently supported formats, you can check out the complete release notes as always. Now let's have a look at DITA authoring functionality. As in the previous releases, we continue to work on expanding the options for customizing the appearance and content of PDF publications. The first new customization feature to mention here is the configurable back cover page. You can see an example of it here and in our motorcycle demo on our demo website. By the way, this motorcycle demo now also contains a 2-column landscape-oriented A5 document, to give you an example of what's possible. The second customization feature we'd like to highlight here is related to the Generic IPC specification. Here you can now define the visibility, width, and alignment of columns for parts catalogs. PDF rules are now also supported in custom plugins, not only in out-of-the-box specification components as before. And last but not least, you can see the total page counts displayed in your PDF publications. These were the main features for DITA authoring, and we'll now also have a look at S1000D. First, the illustration ICN can now be displayed in HTML publications, as you can see on the bottom here in red. Previously, these were displayed in the PDF publications only. References to external publications can now be created for S1000D6 data modules in the document editor and displayed in the HTML and PDF publications. And change marks are now displayed when opening an updated PM or SCPM data module in RapidAuthor if you're working in standalone mode, so the author can track the changes easier than before. Now we'll have a look at general authoring improvements. First, our approach to using context geometry has slightly changed, and we have simplified a couple of things. Previously, we used 2 terms, background and context. We have combined these two into the single term context. The transparency and the context are now independent properties of geometry. The context property of geometry affects only the rendering in 3D publications and the line style in 2D illustrations. And transparency as a property determines whether items behind this geometry are visible in the 2D illustration. We will show you an example of how that works and what you can do in the next slide. First, to better illustrate the functionality, we will set the selection highlight mode to translucent shell. In Rapid Catalog, context geometry is defined per page. Here we set 1/2 of the drill body as context geometry, which shows it as transparent in both 2D and 3D by default. In the 2D preview, its line style is also changed to dashed, and you can select a different line style here for context geometry in 2D images. The style is selected from the Cortana 2D editor style library. Previously, context geometry was always shown with fixed transparency. For compatibility reasons, this remains the default. However, you can now also disable this transparency override and control transparency individually for each context object in the material editor. We recommend this for new projects as it makes the publication independent of program options. As you can see, our object is now no longer transparent. The line style in 2D remains unchanged. And now we can define transparency for our context object and the remaining non-context part of the drill body in the material editor. Now both parts become transparent in 2D and 3D, and the dashed line style is applied only to the context part. Transparency and context settings are now handled independently. In the new release, you can specify context geometry rendering modes in the publishing options as well. Here you can select between default, X-ray, translucent shell, and a new mode hidden that we will show later. These rendering modes can also be selected in the resulting publication using this new setting. You can easily see the difference between X-ray, translucent shell, and the new rendering option I mentioned before, hidden. In RapidManual, you can set geometry as context or remove it from context using the corresponding buttons or the context menu. The geometry retains the context flag for the entire procedure. Transparency settings, 3D rendering modes, and line styles for 2D images work just in the same way as in Rapid Catalog. Next, we have context geometry added from Teamcenter by using the add context geometry command. Now receives the context geometry flag and can be updated automatically. And geometry can now be trimmed or cut by a cylinder, not just by a box. This allows you to create holes easily and quickly. And with a customer request, let's have a look at how this works. First, you select cylinder as the cutting shape. Then you specify its quality, so the number of side faces of the prism that approximates the cylinder. Then you position the cylinder, specify its diameter, and click Cut. And now the new hole is complete. It's actually a good example to see the differences between imported holes and the new hole we just created. Applicability is now supported for the pages in generic parts catalogs. Previously, that was available for DPL rows only. First, we need to create the reference table. Our table contains two items, model A and model B. And now we will specify applicability in the page metadata. We'll also do this for both IPC pages, once for model A and once for model B. Let's have a look at the results. Our IPC contains two pages with different applicability values. So when we use the applicability drop-down filter at the top, we see only the page with the selected applicability value. Now, item variants for DPL rows are supported now by the generic IPC specification. They are used here in the same way as in S1000D or ATA documents. The item variant is an additional letter modifier to the item number. It can be any letters except the letters O and I. Now, the complete unique item number in the generic parts catalog is item plus item variant. In a DPL table, a row with an item variant is processed like any other row, so it directly affects the hierarchy. In our example here, we have added item variants to the fourth item in the DPL table, and this is the resulting publication. And of course, we have many smaller changes as well. To mention a few, first we have discontinued support for 3D PDF output. We have discussed this with a lot of you and many customers, and this is starting with this release. Also, assemblies can now be excluded from your selection when using the selection find items command. This is useful when you need to perform operations on multiple items, for example, to delete items. After this overview for general authoring changes, let's have a look at what's new for 2D as well. First, we will show you new schemes starting with the numeric one. Setting this up here. The numeric scheme allows you to define whether zeros are added to the beginning of the callout and define the length of callouts. You can also specify a numbering step. We will set this default as default and create several callouts. You can see the numbering step. If you remove some of the callouts, you can now also easily renumber them. To do this, you just click on any callout and choose Renumber from the context menu. Another new feature is postfixes and prefixes you can add to your callouts. As required by some standards like S1000D, you can encapsulate the callout's value. If this feature is on, it limits the selected area of the callout to the main text of the callout, so without prefix or postfix. Let's also have a look at how the alpha scheme works. Here you can choose between upper and lowercase, and you can exclude some letters if this is required by the standard. So you can exclude O and I if you use S1000D, for instance. And of course, the alpha scheme supports renumbering, prefixes, and postfixes in the same way as the numeric scheme. Stroke, fill, and text styles can now be applied at the group level, affecting all applicable objects within the group. We hope this saves you a lot of authoring time. Here we have a group containing several poly-Bezier lines. If we enable the pick point tool, we can easily select and change the style of a particular object in this group. With the pick tool, we can select a whole group and then, for example, apply a stroke style to all objects in the group. And we can do the same for the fill style, so you don't have to select all objects in the group any longer. Points can now be selected using the Lasso tool. Previously, points could only be selected using a rectangular frame, which introduced a couple of limitations. First, you enable the pick point tool, and then you can select points using the freehand lasso. Or the polygonal lasso. Hidden lines can now be preserved in 2D illustrations. Previously, all hidden lines were removed when a 2D illustration was generated. Now you can enable or disable their removal with the new button Keep Hidden Lines. We will demonstrate one possible use case with this simple example. A flange with a hole, which you can see from the top in this first screenshot. To start, we will change its orientation and then generate two images with the new button enabled and disabled. Here we can see the flange from the side, and when you generate a 2D illustration with the disabled button, there's no hole. When you enable the button, the location of the hole becomes visible, and you can of course then edit this illustration further in 2D Editor Pro to remove unnecessary lines. And there's more to the authoring improvements for you. To just mention a couple of examples. Existing project illustrations can now be manually linked to the current IPC page, and precision for linear, angular, and percentage values can now be specified in the options. Now let's have a look at publication features. To start, a new selection mode called Isolate has been added to HTML publications. This new mode makes only the selected items visible and hides all other objects. This mode makes it easier to identify and examine individual objects, as you can see. And tooltips can now be configured in all RapidManual publications. You can define the format and displayed metadata using this new publishing option called Tooltip Format. And you can select the appropriate metadata from a list of available ones. This is what the publication then looks like. And in our last main section for today, we will also have a look at improvements to our Teamcenter connection and integrations with Teamcenter modules. This is another feature for DITA authoring, and it's the ability to configure MIME types in RapidAuthor Administrator. We have added a new tab called DITA Objects that launches a dialog box for adding the file types required for your multimedia library. And here's the result in our example. We have added 3 MIME types for JPEG, PNG, and MP4 files. And now we can import DITA multimedia objects. We will show this in the next slide. The bulk import of multimedia files is now available for DITA projects. This operation can be performed in RapidAuthor Administrator for Active Workspace. You can use the new Import DITA Media button and specify the folder where your files are stored. File extensions and MIME types will be detected automatically if you have created MIME types, as we showed before. And you can use file names for item IDs, or they will be generated automatically. In our sample, the names have been generated automatically. It's the graphics number in the right column. Yeah, that's visible. Previously, you had to use additional settings to reuse DITA content management topics and graphics. These settings are not required any longer. As displayed on the screenshots, now you can see both Cortana 3D topics and content management topics in the search result. These can be distinguished by IDs. As shown in the document previews on our screenshots here, the ID of Cortana 3D topic starts with topic. The ID of content management topic starts with an X. And now you can configure your export of S1000D publication modules from Active Workspace. You can select the required components to export and choose the export options. Then you can define whether DDN data dispatch node and DML data module lists are created, whether exported files will be packed as a zip archive, and whether BRACs, ACT, PCT, and CCT files are included or not. And we will show you a summary after a successful export. For our easy plan integration, you can now apply the bill of process configured by revision and/or variant rules, not just the latest version. And you can now apply not only the default BOM, but the BOM configured by revision and/or variant rules. This can be done in Active Workspace. That's already it for our quick overview of main new functionality in our 25.12 release. As always, this is a selection, and we have many more smaller changes and improvements for you for the full list. As always, please refer to our release notes, and we have updated a couple of demos on our main demo site if you'd like to have a look. I mentioned the motorcycle demo before. So now it's time for your questions. The first question is, what's the difference between setting context geometry transparency in program options and in the material editor? I will let the team respond to other questions, but just to summarize briefly what I said before, you can keep this global setting in the program options, but that applies to everything you do in RapidAuthor, not just to the current project you're working on. So discoupling this and having settings regarding transparency for your context geometry tied to your project is our recommendation. Let me see if refreshing works properly today. So overriding that transparency of context geometry in program options is retained for compatibility. And we don't recommend this for new ones for the reasons I already mentioned. When the setting is used, opening the project on a system with a different setting can produce different results. If you use the material editor to define transparency individually for each context part, rather than applying globally, that is preferable. You can also leave context parts non-transparent if needed, and regardless of transparency setting, settings, the line style used for context geometry and generated 2D illustrations is the same, and it's specified in the 2D generation options. That's one of the ideas we wanted to make possible. Let me check so we keep the order, and for some reason refresh multiple times. That is probably a separate question then, don't miss that one. Are 3D animations capabilities available in RapidAuthor? Yes. If you have anything to add to that, team, don't overlook the question. Then here, how can I automatically update the geometry added from Teamcenter with the add context geometry command? True. Let's see what the team has to say. I mentioned this command. Use the update context geometry command to replace all context geometry in the project that was added using the add context geometry command with the latest version downloaded from Teamcenter. Let me know if this doesn't completely answer your question or you have a very specific use case in mind, but this is how it generally works. Is RapidAuthor for Teamcenter localized to Spanish? I do not want to, step between the question and the full response from the team, but as a spoiler, I think so, yes. But I will let you guys respond to that as well. Let me just check if that has loaded. I see a new question here. Do we have an option to import callouts, which are presently in VSSX, which is editable into 2D Editor Pro? I do not know that one, and will wait for a proper response from the team. There it is. That's a no. Currently, we do not support VSSX format out of the box. We can have a look, though. If this would save you a lot of time, very happy to discuss after the webinar. In response to the question about Spanish localization, the UI is available in Spanish from this version 25.12. As for the help topics, localization is in discussion at the moment. I remember a discussion internally. The core of our documentation, as you will know, is English. That is probably useful, but if you have separate teams in different countries who prefer working with a different UI language, you can make use of the UI localization. So that was the priority. I think we had that one. Hole removal algorithm with update. We had a long discussion about that. Maybe you can also chip in here, team. And we have had this as a response, that question from Mark. Is it doable? We would have to have a look into VSSX, I suppose, is the high level response. If you want to make sure, or if you have sample data or more context for us, please feel free to reach out after the webinar and we will have a look together. About the hole removal algorithm in the update scenario, hole removal algorithm is similar to the simplification algorithm. It affects how representations are generated. So during an update, if a part has been modified, then its new geometry is processed and holes are removed according to the settings in your import profile, the ones you have defined for hole removal. Similarly, in new parts added during the update, holes are removed according to the same settings. That makes sense. As usual, as a part is considered modified if its name or any metadata imported to the project changes its value. So as a very high-level summary from my understanding of our internal discussions, the whole removal algorithm should not have an issue with updates because we don't change the parts. We change something similar to what we do with the representation of that part. So whatever changes are come in during the update, we recognize that and can apply the same logic you had defined for whole removal after the update. That should work fine. Here's a new question about other localizations being added besides Spanish. I don't have a full list to copy paste right here, but we do have several localizations already being available. UI localizations in RapidAuthor for Teamcenter. Maybe one of you in the team has a full list ready, then we can paste that for completeness sake. I'm not aware of any ongoing discussions regarding other languages than Spanish that we just released. But if you know, team, feel free to add the information. And by the way, many of the features we keep presenting in the What's New and that we continuously add to the product are the result of discussions with our customers. So for example, if you see the list of currently supported languages that are available for UI localization and the one you're interested in is missing, don't give up, but tell us. We will, prioritize based on customer requests. This is our most important source of information for product prioritization. So you do have a say. We do have a lot of customers, so we cannot immediately bump everything to the top of the priority list that might be on your wish list, but we will always discuss it. I think this is new. Why ever it doesn't show me in Teams. That was about the VSSX. The team has discussed and we are not familiar with the format and would need to analyze. But as mentioned, Trinity, please reach out after the webinar if you have examples for what exactly you would want to import. We'll be glad to have a look. There seems to be no ongoing discussion about additional new languages for localization, but we have 8 languages supported at the moment. I think this is the main standard languages you would expect. If anyone has a list handy, please feel free to add it to the comments. Otherwise, we can do that after the webinar, of course. And if the language you'd be most interested in is not in that list, please do let us know. Then we will put it in the queue and start this discussion. Perfect. Yeah, the currently supported languages: English, German, French, Italian, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. So as I said, if you are interested in UI localization in any other language, please do let us know, and we will discuss how we can make that happen. As a last call, don't hold back. Feel free to ask whatever is on your mind. If there's anything where you'd expect to require more discussion, or you'd like to share an example that is specific to your process, a call after the webinar might obviously be easier. But you can ask whatever you are interested in. I would say then I will just we'll win back some time before your next meeting. And if right after hanging up you have the perfect question you wanted to ask us, feel free to contact us directly or on our support email, support@contoner3d.com, and let us know what you think. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day and week, and we'll be in touch.